Hey, and welcome to DJ and TV tonight. It is Wednesday, and it is time for us to kind of get our thinking hat on tonight because we're going to be talking about communicating with our couples with Artem. Good evening, Artem.
Good evening, John. How are you?
I am doing well, doing very, very well. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Yeah, no, I thank you for having me. I know it's hectic days right now, but I appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to do this, and I'm sure everybody watching definitely appreciates the time that's being put in.
Oh, hang on a sec. I've got a video player that just decided it was going to pop open. So sorry about that. Yeah, this is a time for a lot of us where, as we were talking before, it's this unknown, it's this craziness, but there's things that we can do for our business and for ourselves to kind of at least have a little bit of a sense of normalcy. Is that a good way to describe it?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's what we're all striving for. I guess normalcy is subjective, like everything else in life, right?
Especially right now. It is. So Artem, kind of give us a little insight here. I've got a couple of things I'm doing while you're talking. Give us a little what we're going to be touching base on tonight.
Sure. I really wanted to make sure we discuss communication and what that truly means. I guess communication can take on many forms. I just feel like right now we are going through a point where communication is so imperative. And I don't mean just in the event space. I feel like it's always very imperative in the event space. But I just feel like when you look at the workforce, and I've had conversations with many in the corporate area, in the corporate field, where you're looking at generational differences. Mm-hmm. You're looking at specific generations being in the workforce needing to work together. You're looking at audiences, specific audiences, where I'm sure there's tons of material for entrepreneurs looking at how do I reach a certain demographic? How do I speak to X, Y, and Z? How do I speak to this generation? How do I speak to this demographic? And all of that really boils down to communication. And, we always go through as event professionals, we go through the many articles and the many things that we look at and review. It's like, what's the key to a happy marriage? And it's always communication, right? What's the key to good sex? Communication, right? What's the key to properly reaching your specific target market? Communication.
What's the key to throwing a perfect game in baseball? Communication.
Right, exactly.
It goes everywhere.
It does, absolutely. And I feel like, but that's to a great point. You brought up a baseball reference. When you look at sports is just an analogy for everything else in life. And I feel like when we are working an event, and if we're going to go event specific right now, when we're working an event, we have event partners. That's our team. So that's yourself. Like I'm an MC. So I'm constantly communicating with my DJ or with the band leader. We're constantly communicating with the photographer, cinematographer, the planner, whomever. And a lot of the communication is internal. So that's when you have your team that's in play. And then we have our external communication. So we are communicating to our guests, right? To the guests of honor, to their guests, to our general audience. So there's a lot of communication that comes into play. It's internal and external. And what I've realized is you need to adjust your communication process to different audiences.
And I think that's the adjusting is something that I think this time is showing us another large adjustment, a large correction of how we communicate as a society and as in a business world. So yeah, this is an evolving topic of communicating, especially with that team you were referring to with weddings.
Yeah, and I feel like there can't be no psychological footprint after this is all said and done. It's going to affect us in one way or another, and especially the younger generation, where this is causing proms to be missed, graduations to be missed. But even aside of that, like they focus just on the positive. You look at someone like, for me, I grew up with instant messenger and texting on a phone. And then everything else is kind of live communication. And then someone right now that's in high school, they've got, I can't even list the amount of social media networks, the opportunities that they have to communicate. And then they have the opportunities to communicate well or not so well. So that's what I think happens. Like so many doors are available, but do you open them or do you keep them shut?
And how they utilize those doors, I think, is probably the interesting thing. this from our generation and such, where we learned as these technologies were coming through, we communicate differently from platform to platform. And it's interesting for me watching my younger children as they're getting into using some of these different platforms. They don't communicate that much differently from platform to platform, to a point. They may put up different content, but when they're communicating with their peers or what have you, it's like I feel like almost at times as I'm watching them, like it's like a bull in a china shop. It's going to be this methodology of communication, which brings me back to these. It's like, okay, as we're working with this generation, as they're going to come up, is it something that they're going to be expecting more of a kid's glove type of a treatment or what have you, because they're going to react and communicate one way and we have to be the flexible ones? Or is it going to be something that they're going to evolve their communication skills to be softer?
Sure. That's a great question. I think you bring up a good point of just evolution. I think we're all going to kind of have to meet in the middle if we want to make it work. And I think the key to really effective communication is empathy. I remember attending an event. It was a networking event. It was in a location where right next to where the event was, there was a restaurant. And so I selfishly had arranged for dinner with a friend right after that networking event. So as I'm at that networking event, there's this woman there that's holding court. She's got everybody around her, and all she's doing for about 20 minutes straight is just complaining about millennials and how they expect things too quickly. They don't communicate properly with her. And she went on and on and on, right? And we've heard all the stereotypes. Mm-hmm. And so she did that, and everybody was agreeing with her, and it was just like, it was great. It was like a court jester just doing their thing, right? She was, as the kids say, she was in her bag that night. So she was getting everything out of her system, and it was understandable. And then I started to have, after that event, I had dinner with my friend, and I asked her how her day was, and she was on the board at Columbia University reviewing different scholarship applications. And what they did was they had one-on-one interviews with those applicants.
Sure.
She goes, it was really hard. And I go, why was it hard? I mean, it sounds kind of fun. She's like, yeah, but there's so many amazing 17 and 18 and 19-year-olds that want these scholarships. And I looked at the flip side of like, I was just told by somebody 20 minutes ago that this is the worst generation ever possible. And now I have someone sitting next to me going, there's so many amazing people here within that age range that are doing amazing, great things. Mm-hmm. And I feel like just if you really look at it, every generation has the good and the bad. Every demographic has the good and the bad. So it really just comes down to, are we willing to be empathetic and are we willing to communicate properly? So you know how you look at certain things, and when there's divisiveness, I'm going to try to properly say this. When there's divisiveness, you look at one side going, so-and-so is trying to ruin things for me. Mm-hmm. And you look, the other side says, so-and-so is trying to ruin things for me. When in reality, no one's actively trying to ruin anything for anybody. They're just trying to do things that they feel is right.
Yep.
So I feel like, well, if we communicated better, and admittedly, we've never been a society amazingly great at it. So I feel like we're working our way towards it. There's an episode I saw of, just going back to sports. ESPN does the wonderful 30 for 30 documentaries. There was a documentary about Magic Johnson, and when his diagnosis came out and he had to leave the NBA because he found out that he was HIV positive.
Yes.
There was a scene where, and they kind of got into the history of it, and when things were kind of still a bit unknown. Mm-hmm. And so there was a scene where somehow this young child in an elementary school had contracted it, and it was through like blood transfusion, and he was being escorted out of the school and being driven away from the school. Yes. And the reason I bring up such a horrible scene is because there was a woman there into the camera just shouting and very irate and saying, go home, we don't want you here, blah, blah, blah. And, it was kind of very nasty and very unlike.
I remember those. Yep,
okay.
Yep.
So that exact scene I'm talking about.
Oh, yes. Only too well. That was whole thing with Magic. He was one of my favorite basketball heroes back in the day. So that became,
Got it. So, and that was going on. Like, I'm sure that was just captured on film. I'm sure there was multiple instances of that. And I looked at it and I took a step back and I thought, my gut reaction was, what a horrible person.
Yeah, precisely. That's what you would jump to.
Why is she doing that? And I took a step back and I kind of thought to myself, this isn't probably what she is like all the time, hopefully not, for the sake of her family. But this is just a parent acting out of fear.
Oh, for sure.
Because their education wasn't there. We still were kind of wrapped around the ignorance of what it was. And all it was just a mother going into like protection mode. And that spewed, I mean, the wrong approach, but it spewed out of just not properly understanding herself, her environment, and everything around her.
That was going on. Or that, yeah.
Right. So I think that communication comes down to not only how do you communicate with others, or how do you communicate with yourself too, right? So that internal communication is not just internally amongst your team. How do you talk to yourself? So I've noticed that, like, if I'm positive around everybody else, I need to make it a point to be positive to myself. And also, if I'm having a bad day, no one should know about it, right? Like, it should be extended into, if I can be positive and make it a better environment for those around me, I in turn start to feel better. So I think it comes down to that.
So again, this is an important part of the topic or conversation here, because we're living these types of situations, having the bad day. Is it? I guess probably the phraseology, is it something that you're saying, you know, you fake it till you make it type of a situation, or is it something that, I mean, it's tough to put on that brave face sometimes when you've got that fear in the unknown.
Sure. I'll preface with the fact that I'm in no way a medical expert, right? Yeah. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything. And I won't put it as fake it till you make it, because I think there are appropriate times to just kind of take a step back and self-analyze and go, I'm upset and here's why. I think it's okay to acknowledge those things. I just think that it's important to, once you've acknowledged it, figure out a way, how do I pivot? How do I bring myself to where I want to be, which is hopefully happy, right? So I think that internal communication has to happen, and you need to understand yourself. Because I feel like, let's be realistic, if we're managing people, whether that's a multi-op owner or it's somebody who's a single op like myself, but I'm still managing event partners.
Yeah, you're engaging people, yes.
Yeah, I'm still managing a team come event day, and I'm managing the relationships that I have. So if I'm being brought in by a planner, I understand that not only is my reputation with my performance, my reputation's on the line, so is the planners. They brought us in, right? So I think there is something to be said about acknowledging where you're in a mental space or your communication with yourself isn't optimal, and then pivot to like, all right, well, where do I take it to? Like, what do I need to do to take it to where I want it to be? And I would say, like, just to hop back to the generational differences, we've gone through the stereotypes of like millennials or this and that, and the whole like participation trophy generation. And my counter to that is always like, there wasn't this toddler uprising that said, give us trophies or else, right? It wasn't like a revolution by toddlers.
That is true. Yeah. They would have.
Someone gave them those trophies. Right. So I feel like we're not looking within ourselves sometimes. Why do they expect trophies? Because we gave it to them.
Yeah, that's very true. We kind of set that system up.
Right. And that's not, I'm not saying it's a positive or negative, because you know what? I think there are generations preceding us that would have loved a participation trophy and just never got it. Right. So I think there's the good and the bad, and we just have to self-analyze and continually evolve. So to answer the question that you originally asked, who is going to make the change and who is going to make the evolutionary experience happen, it's got to be everybody, right? That's proper communication. So I think someone who is going into the workforce, for example, and is young, needs to understand why a person that's older of a certain generation is acting the way that they are and is making the decisions that they're making. Vice versa, that person has to look at a millennial or whatever they're called now, someone that's younger. They need to understand why they're doing those things. Like you brought up your kids and how they operate differently or communicate differently on different platforms, but essentially it's still communication at its core. I have found that it's really kind of more like etiquette. Like there's certain etiquette on Instagram that is different than Facebook and then like TikTok and Snapchat and whatever else you're doing. It's at its core the same. You're sharing stories, you're making videos, you're putting out visuals that help with the storytelling, but you're doing it in different ways, and there's different types of etiquette. And I think that's what's going to fuel the evolution and us understanding a little bit of like, How you communicate with an event planner, it's going to be different how you communicate with the photographer. It's going to be different how you communicate with the bride or a groom or whomever, and how you communicate with a same-sex couple, or how you communicate with, a corporate decision maker. All those different things. There's different types of communication.
I wanted to dig into, you used the word, talked about empathy before. That's obviously a needed thing in a variety of situations. Let's take that empathy concept and idea, and let's extend that into working with the team that we're going to be working with on a Saturday night at the wedding.
Right.
Because there's we see so many Facebook posts from DJs who are like, that photographer, that coordinator, talk us through a little bit how empathy would be able to help in a lot of those situations to not have that headbutting.
Sure. That's a great point, and I'm not going to sit here and say that that's 100% avoidable, because it just is what it is. People are different. However, I think the best way to stack the deck in your favor, if you will, it needs to be proper communication prior to the event. So I think coming to a photographer and saying, here's my timeline, like it or leave it, is probably not a good way to start that conversation. Right? So communication, I feel like, needs to happen well in advance. So for me, the joke that I always use with my brides and grooms, and even with my planners that I work with, I don't want to even talk to you the day of. Like, everything needs to be set up prior. So that way the day of is about execution. So we know what we want to do, and we know we've gone over all the steps. Now we're going to just execute it that day. Now it's like showtime. We've gone through our process of like rehearsal, if you will, right? We've had the conversations. Now it's the live show. And I'm not saying specifically like a rehearsal dinner, but if you have a conversation with the wedding party prior, like, your wedding party should know who you are, in my opinion. Everybody does things differently. But the wedding party, especially those that are making toasts, or the parents specifically, they know who I am at least, 2 weeks out. We've had phone conversations. We've maybe even done conference calls. We maybe emailed back and forth.
Right.
But they know who I am. I know who they are. I know what their intentions are. They know not to go past 3 minutes for a toast, or preferably a minute and a half. But the certain things, those elements are discussed beforehand. So I'm not taking them to the side and saying, make sure you bring your champagne flute with you when you go up there. In that moment, they know beforehand. I might remind them throughout cocktail hour, or just as I check in and prepare with them. But I think those conversations and that communication needs to happen beforehand. And going back to adjusting communication, that's a conversation that has to happen independently with a planner, with a photographer, with a cinematographer, bride, groom, parents, those that are toasting, the venue, whomever. So I think it just comes down to putting in that work, properly preparing, to make sure that the communication is just there. And sometimes you might have to pull it out a little bit more from one than the other. And not everyone is a event entertainer. Not everyone's an extrovert, right? That wants to have a conversation. But that's going to come down on you. This is why we're the hosts, right? So we coordinate the run of show. And so, go ahead.
Yeah, you gave us a laundry list of different entities that are involved at the wedding, and that's not other vendors, but just the people involved with parents and wedding party, what have you. When you're having those communications with these, are these more individual communications you're having, or are you trying to do something more as a group setting type of situation when you're preparing them for what to expect during the course of the event?
Yeah, great question. If you have the opportunity to do separate individual conversations, I would suggest doing that, purely because it's easy to get that like big classroom eyes start to wander away situation where someone you're talking to, if you're talking to a group of 10 people, you might be connecting with 2 of them, but maybe the other 8, like, you don't know who they all are. For example, when you're on stage speaking and you're speaking to 1,000 people, but for the most part, you know who's in that room, whether it's event entertainers or a commission of dentists or an association of realtors. You know, for the most part, who you're speaking to and how to kind of angle that communication. When you're speaking to a wedding party, they might all have different types of communication that they're going to receive properly, right? That they're going to be welcoming to. So I think you might notice that the best man responds to this type of communication, and he'll only get back to you on a text. You realize that,
Yes.
the maid of honor is going to be sending you images, and that's how she likes to communicate. So those are all different types of communication, and one might be very formal. You're speaking to a colleague, you're speaking to an event planner. Another one might be very informal, where it's an event planner you've worked with 100 times versus one you've just started working with.
Yes.
Those are all different types of situations you're going to find yourself in, and I think it requires different types of communication.
Let's talk about other vendors and how to you mentioned ones that you have worked with on a short term or in the first time, what have you, and then the more informal of ones you worked with. How do you break the ice when you know you need to have these communications with these people that first time? How do you break the ice to get, I don't want to say permission to contact them, but maybe that's the best way to describe it.
Sure. Everyone likes to receive that introduction in a different way, understandably. So I get that. I think if you're talking about like an event planner, I would say for the most part, most event planner, cinematographer, photographer, I think because we have that runner show and we have that entertainment breakdown, the appreciation level is already there just because of the fact that you're reaching out, right? And so the fact that it's just something that's, oh, I don't have to have this on my schedule, reach out to the person that has this timeline, it's coming to you before you even reach out. So if you're the person initiating that conversation, you're already kind of a step ahead. Mm-hmm. So I think for the most part, it's appreciated, and the best way to break the ice is to say, hey, I'm going to be the representative of the guests of honor. Maybe not do it in that way. Don't phrase it that way.
Exactly.
But in a sense, say, I'm going to be the entertainment. And for the most part, like if it's a planner, they know who you are. Mm-hmm. They probably brought you in. And if not, if you've just been put to work together, then that's a great opportunity to build that relationship. I think another thing that you could do if you really wanted to just go the extra mile, look at their work and pick out something that you admire. And when you make that initial contact, just go, hey, by the way, we're going to be working together. FYI, I loved this that you did here. That was very cool. So everybody likes compliments. Mm-hmm. I think it can't hurt to start off with that. And then another thing is if you can pinpoint based on what their information is online, I'm not saying go do deep dive research and stuff. But if there's something that's available online, like if it's part of their website or just casually part of their social media, and what I mean by that is if it's something they put up the last like 2 weeks, not like digging around 6 months into their social media feed. But if you find something that's of personal interest to you, you could use that as well. So you could say something like, especially if you're connected on social media. If you're not, then it's tread a little lighter. But I think it's pretty easy to start off with I just hopped on your website. I loved the so-and-so event that you did. I thought that's really cool. Can't wait to work with you. By the way, here's the information that I run through. Let me know of your thoughts, and let's have a conversation and schedule it. Just like, hey, let's talk.
I love that idea, that concept of going and finding, especially when you can look them up on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever. There's resources to find, hopefully, information on most everyone. So we've got this person though, and immediately as I'm thinking about sending that communication over, you have people who are maybe they get offended because they're like, I am so busy, I don't have time to deal with this. How do you, when you run into that person, how do you still be able to communicate with them because they are so busy?
Right. I think it comes down, or it actually goes back to empathy, right? So like, okay, I get it. You're busy. In the back of my head, I'm saying we're all busy. Come on, bro. Right?
There is that, yes.
Yeah. But I will say that, okay, if you feel like, are you saying like they're not responsive because of that? Like they're
sometimes I've had it where they're just, they're not responsive, or they get back to, oh, I've been so busy. I've got to, did this go that, and, what did you need again? You almost feel like there's this mild blow off going on when it comes to that. And it's generally throwing back saying, oh, I'm so busy. That's one area that I have struggled over the years, especially when you're trying to, the bride says, hey, here's, Joni, the event planner or the catering manager's email. Just send her an email. She wants you to drop her a line. Okay, I do. And then I don't hear back for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. And I'm sure we've all run into that. One of the things that I've started to implement is that kind of like not necessarily a groupthink mentality. I'm not looking to single anybody out when I do it, but if I sense a little bit of resistance for whatever reason, I just put everybody that's involved on an email and just go, hey, I can't wait to be part of the team. And it's great that we're all aligned with making sure so-and-so's day is as magical as possible. Here's what I need. And I just put like a list of everything. And then if somebody, and I'll just say like, if you already gotten to me, great, thank you so much. If not, please get it to me as soon as possible, that kind of thing. So take a little initiative.
Mm-hmm.
When there is an event planner involved, it's obviously facilitated. It's obviously a lot easier, hopefully. But for the most part, I just feel like if we can empathize with where they're at, and I'll say, look, I know you have more than one client happening right now. I do too. But in their eyes, they're the only ones that we're working with, right? So I want to maintain that illusion to them. They know, like my clients know they're not the only couple that I'm working with,
Mm-hmm.
but I want them to have that feeling at least. So I want to make sure it's a creative team effort. So then I'll probably throw everybody on one email or just try to get something together where everybody's on a call or even like a conference call visually and just say, hey, here's what I need. I need everybody involved. I would not take it directly to the client. That's not their concern, and it shouldn't be anything that's part of their plate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've certainly, the reason I bring it up because I've considered it, but I just don't think it's the right way to go. But I will say that I think the best thing to do is try to get, if you're really like, it's like pulling teeth, if you really tried a couple of times, get everybody on one email, and then it becomes, not without saying it, but like you're the person that's holding this back. And so then they kind of start to get to that. I luckily have not run into that too much, but then they start to get to a point where they realize, okay, well, this team now depends on me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like going back to your baseball analogy, right? Like golfers don't have the same team mentality that baseball or basketball or football players do. So I think when you're part of a team, it creates a different type of communication within that team. And then it becomes, all right, well, psychologically, it gives them that little bump where it's like, we can't do this without you. And that's pretty like, that beefs you up a little bit. It's like, oh, I'm important.
Sure.
I'm part of this team now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that gives you a little bit of a psyche uplifting sort of thing where they go, okay, and now it's go time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that idea of in essence selling that concept would definitely go a long way with a lot of people being part of that positive creative team for the day. Let's talk a little bit about communication tools. There's a lot of different things that we can use. What have you found that has been more successful? I mean, if we could almost kind of rank them as this is preferred, maybe these aren't so much, or this is a faux pas type, whatever. Let's talk about some communication methods when it comes to working with the couples and even coming to with other vendors. Sure.
I'm going to give you the answer, which I think first I'll give you the one that I don't think you're looking for, but unfortunately I have to mention it, and then I'll give you what I think you're looking for. So I think the best tools for communication are empathy, like we talked about, and active listening, because active listening really leads to empathy. So you need to understand where that person or people or whomever that group, where they're coming from to really get to that empathy part where you go, oh, all right, I get it. And then now that I get it, how do I pivot what I've been doing and saying, and how do I get them to understand my point? How do I flip that empathy? So it needs to be like an empathy boomerang. Let's coin that term if we can. So once you have that active listening, you can get to the empathy and you can get to a communication breakthrough. Giving you the answer that I'm sure you were looking for in terms of like tools as far as like email or phone or anything like that. The real answer is that I can't really rank them because it comes down to who's comfortable with what. So this is like one of my favorite brides. This is an example I always use. She would respond to my emails via text message, meaning she would read the email and give me the answer, but texting it.
Okay.
So I'm like, just stay on one track. Like, please let me, for my sake, selfishly, I want to copy and paste things into my documents, right? So let's just stay on one thing. And the same thing with like email chains. We're like, let's just stay on one thing here. And you know, like when you're working with the photographer and cinematographer and the planners, everybody likes to have their spreadsheet and everybody likes to have their timeline.
Right.
And when I'm producing things, I like to give the photo booth attendant their timeline, the lighting technician their own timeline. Everybody has little relevant notes just to their role. And so I create that. I go through that process. So I think that shooting back to how do you break through or how do you communicate, what are the tools, it really comes down to understanding what they're comfortable with. And I think it could be just as simple as, hey, what are you most comfortable with? And I think I've heard someone say before, which I agree with, like continue the pattern that they start. So if they reached out to you on a direct message on Instagram, keep that going until you can push for a call or whatever it is. But keep going however they started. If they emailed you, keep going with an email. If they called you and then you realize that texting is the best thing to do, go ahead and text. So I think it's figuring out what works for them, how do they initiate, and then also other factors. And by what I mean by external factors is like if it's the afternoon and they're at work, maybe texting or an email so they can look back at it later. Texting for like more immediate, because the thing is like they'll look at the text and then they'll put it down, and there won't be a reminder when they go home
Right.
that they didn't respond to you, right? But in an email, hopefully they'll be able to put it on unread and see it. So if it's the middle of the day, maybe an email or text possibly is more appropriate if it's a quick sort of communication. If it's something where you know they like to have a specific time during the day where they like to talk to you, whether that's the evening or specifically like in the morning where they have that downtime, whatever, depends on what their job is and what their environment is. So it really comes down to like communicating through their channels of how they like to take in information. But I will say, traditionally, people like to watch, listen, and read. So based on those three things, especially if we're talking promotionally, I think you need to hit on those three. So for read, like if you're putting out content that people want to read, like a blog or an article, and then if you're talking about watch, it's something like this. It's
Yes.
YouTube video, or even posting something on Instagram that's a video. It's visual, photography, all that. And then as far as just like listen, podcast or a voicemail or an actual phone call, things like that. So watch, listen, and read are the key factors driving that. And then the tools really come into play of what's comfortable for them.
I want to jump back. At the beginning, when you started answering the question, you talked about active listening and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked as you continued on about having a timeline for the other vendors that you have prepared.
Yeah.
How do you arrive at that? And it's going to be a great example of your active listening. Give us an example of the conversation you would have with another vendor that you were preparing a timeline for, so everyone's on the same page.
Sure. Well, when I say timeline, it's more so internal for us. So like if I'm producing and we're in charge of the photo station or photo booth and we're in charge of the lighting, those are our internal people, but they still get their own. So for example, a photo booth attendant doesn't care about lighting cues. They have nothing to do with it. And then vice versa, the lighting technician doesn't care about when the photo booth is open or not, right? And what the stipulations of it are. But when you're working with external, so it's kind of like, it's weird because they're internally part of the event partner team, but they're external to your team.
Right.
So when you're working with them, it's always good for you to understand what they're looking for. So a photographer might, depending on time of day, they might want to know what you plan to do during when they want to take them out for a sunset shot, right? So that's a conversation that should be had, right? And you're going to try to kind of plan out when that's going to happen. With a cinematographer, you know if you're bringing them out from a staircase, they need to understand that that's going to happen from a staircase up top rather than the door that everybody else will walk through when you're doing introductions. So it's just kind of the empathy of what's their role. Like, so my role as an MC, I know what it is, right? As far as cinematographers, I might not know how to work the camera or any of the technological stuff, but I know what they're trying to capture. Right? I might not have the shot list, but I know what they need to do, and I know they might need to push people out of the way. And even as a silly example, something I was taught by Mike Weeder to do for a long time, whenever I do my introductions, I'm personally a proponent of getting everybody up and lining them around the dance floor when people come into the room. Everyone does it differently, no problem, but that's what I like to do, and I feel like it creates more of an intimate environment when that happens. whenever I do that, I tell people that they can use their phones to take pictures because it's going to happen. It's inevitable anyway. But I ask that they let the professionals capture the first shots.
Sure.
And by doing that, all it does is it gives them the cue, and they can choose to listen or not. I know that some may not. It does give them the cue to, please consider that. So, I'm throwing the empathy there.
Yep.
But what it also does is it shows the cinematographers and the photographers, I'm on your side on this one.
For sure.
Right? Like, hey, I get what you guys are going through, and I get what you might need to do here. So let me try to stack the deck for you. So I think that's part of our responsibility when we put on those timelines and we create the run of show. When you're empathizing with what their role is, that's when you can create timelines that reflect what they're looking for and what their goal is as that specific event partner. And yeah, a conversation beforehand could be like, what are you looking for? What are you looking to get? And if it's just simple, if they're not aligned with kind of like where you are mentally, right, or with what type of service you're providing, and they might just say, my goal is to take pictures, right? I'm like, all right, can we get a little bit more out of that possibly? Yeah. If you can't, then that actually kind of gives you a little bit more of a blank slate to work with, and it could work in your favor where you get to run what's happening.
Yeah, to set their shots up or set the activities up for them to shoot.
Right, exactly. Spoken like a control freak, but I embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Well, then they're done that.
Yeah, I think we all are, and I have no problem with that.
Yeah, there's those moments where it's like, oh, come on now. Okay, we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Great concepts and great thoughts here that we're sharing tonight. And for those of you out there, if you've got any last minute questions, we got a few more minutes here, and we're going to be wrapping things up tonight. You can put those down in the chat session. A lot of people are just making some comments about their region of the country and such, and how working with other vendors and the communication varies from locale to locale, which we all know,
100%.
It's just the way it is, and we're a big country with that. So,
in a way, but I would also say, can I address that real quick?
Yeah,
I would say, as far as regionally, if that's something that you feel like isn't optimal where you are, that actually gives you a wonderful opportunity to be the person to initiate that.
To create it.
Right. So I feel like anytime you're upset with a situation, I could always look at it and go, well, how can I be the person to solve this? Because when you're the first, there's no greater advantage.
Mm-hmm. For sure. There's been many times over the years where we've been the first at doing one thing or the other, and you are going into unblazed territory, yes, but people will, especially if they see a result of that or feel a result of that, they will not only embrace it, but they will talk about that to all of their friends, which is obviously what we like to do.
Yeah. You want that word of mouth.
Artem, we got a couple minutes left. Can you just kind of send us off with some thoughts to keep in mind? And you've put a lot of different thoughts into the communication, but things that people need to keep in mind as they are having these contacts with couples and other vendors.
Sure. Well, again, going back to empathy, just knowing hey, what are they going through? What's going on in their head? And if it really comes down to maybe just reach out to a couple photographers, reach out to a couple cinematographers, reach out to your previous clients and say, what was going through your head when you were going through this process? So sometimes it just comes down to a little bit of research and understanding what's going on. I feel like a lot of people, if we're going to go with a wedding conversation, a lot of the professionals in our industry have gone through a wedding for themselves. They've gotten married. Mm-hmm. So it's a different mentality. And I realize every time when I go to a wedding as a guest, I don't have the mentality of a guest. We can't shake basically the professional critiques that constantly are running through our heads. But it's just understanding what is that performer doing or what is that cinematographer doing. So I think going back to empathy, just understanding everyone's role a little bit better will give you a huge advantage in knowing how to communicate with them. So it's you can't communicate with a child in the same way that you communicate with your spouse or with a peer. So you have to adjust. And let's say you can't communicate with your teenager in the same way that you communicate with your toddler. So it just comes down to, we constantly have to do this, right? So we're always adjusting our communication anyway, which is probably not as aware of it all the time.
Mm-hmm, sure.
But we're constantly doing it. So I interact differently with my peers in a networking setting than I do in a networking setting full of various industries, right? We're not making inside jokes about DJ facades, right?
Right.
We're not doing those things. We're trying to understand, what is this real estate agent going through? What is this financial advisor going through? So little things like that, where all we're doing is just pivoting. But I think proper communication comes down to understanding the other person's perspective, and then realizing or trying to realize what's going to make them understand my perspective. And I think the biggest thing, which I'll be honest, I don't like it, nobody likes it, but sometimes admitting when your perspective is wrong and jumping to another one. I've been wrong a couple times here and there, and I've acknowledged it internally, and I've moved on, and I've pivoted what I do. I think that's just the process of learning and the process of evolving. Going back to the start of our conversation, it's all about evolution, and we all have to make that effort.
Excellent. Great stuff. Great stuff. All right, if people want to reach out and ask questions or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. You can find me on social media. So as far as if you're hopping on Facebook, it's just Artem Lomaz. That's ARTEM LOMAZ. You can find me directly. You can shoot me a message. You can email me. It's artem@artemlomaz.com. On Instagram, it's very long. It's 93 Entertainment, all spelled out. However, if you just search Artem Lomaz, you'll get it right there.
That'll be a little easier for folks.
Yeah, a little bit easier.
Great stuff. Thank you for being and thank you guys for being with us this evening out on Facebook and YouTube. A lot of folks were out there watching this evening, so thank you very much for that. And we'll be back at the top of the hour. MJ is going to be doing a music and mixing show here on the DJN TV channel. You guys can bounce back in and catch that on YouTube a little bit later tonight. Artem, once again, thanks for being with me tonight.
John, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye, buddy.